Good evening. Welcome to the March 18th meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission. I'll call the meeting to order. Tonight we will have time for public comment, and then the bulk of our time tonight we are in the midst of looking at zoning amendments that are being funded. The project is being funded by a Bylaw Modernization grant, which has its own goals and requirements that we are following along. Tonight, we are going to focus on what's called Section 13 of the existing zoning, which is where the location of regulations for the Riverside Village Center area that is covered by the form-based code. And we have discussed it a few times, but there's been a lot of work done to incorporate the discussions that we've had, that we will go over a section of that tonight, not the entire thing, but we're going to focus on specific concepts that are important building blocks, for lack of no pun intended. We'll have PC, we'll discuss. Oh, wait. Oh, God.
Is your mic on?
No.
Nancy just sent you.
Yeah, we just saw it. She can't hear us. What about Aaron? Can you hear us at MMC TV?
We can hear you.
Okay.
I'm not Aaron, this is Tom. Bye.
Oh, hi, Tom. Oh, that was such a smart troubleshooting.
Sabina, can you mute your audio, please?
I'm not signed into audio. I'm not.
Might be my.
Oh, maybe. Do you want the laptop muted?
I'm gonna mute mine and see what that does for you.
Yes, we can hear you now without an echo. Yeah.
Yeah, we should not mute that computer, I think. I don't know
Can you
why
hear
it
us,
doesn't-
Nancy, now?
Is that better, Tom?
Yeah, I can hear you on my iPad, but not on the computer. So I'm gonna log off the computer and stay on my iPad.
Okay. Interesting, because her identification was on her computer. And what about Tom?
I
Can
can
you hear us?
fine, thank you.
Okay. I'm passing it to you.
Great. And then, do you want me to advance the slides? I'm not.
You
Sure,
should be able to. If it's giving you trouble, I can take over.
I don't think I can, or I'm just not hitting the right button. So if I'll do it, great. Okay, great. So, BMG, you can go on to the next slide. I'm going to go through these first couple slides fairly quickly. It's just kind of letting everyone know where we are. So to stay on track for wrapping up the Bylaw Modernization Grant project by the end of June, which is our deadline, we're going to have to wrap up our reviews by and large by the Planning Commission's meeting on April 15th. To stay on track, we are going to need to hold a meeting on April 29th. So I think we had asked you guys to put a placeholder on your calendar for that. Hopefully, if we plan ahead well, that will be a short meeting. That will be a final review of the red line, but hopefully there should be no outstanding comments by then, reviewing the town plan report and voting to move forward with the public hearing.
So we will have gotten a final version from David prior to that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So also the Planning Commission schedule has shifted a little bit just to allow us a little more time to work on the BMG. So specifically Section 13. So we had initially had the public hearing in early May at the first May meeting. We're moving that now to the second meeting. That's also putting the select board's meeting, pushing that to the second meeting in June. But that should all be good. So if you want to go to the next slide. So for April 1st, next meeting, well, so today we're gonna review, Chris Brown's idea to do away with the frontage types. So we're gonna go through that and what our ideas are for that. So we'll have full discussion on that. So at the April 1st meeting, we'll take comments from today on that, bring that back. Hopefully those issues will be resolved and that will be done. Also at the April 1st meeting, I want to talk a little about public space requirements. Cue that up, and then hopefully, well, I had hoped we would talk about some review process stuff. Most of all the planning commission's comments are on section 10, which is the review procedures, and section 13. I am not taking the lead on section 13, so we've got a working group on that. David is going to be the lead on section 10. I just need to coordinate that with him. So on April 15th, hopefully by that time, we will be able to finalize any public space and review process. Queuing us up for the April 29th meeting, which hopefully all issues will be resolved, fingers crossed. So that will be a short meeting. Great. So this just assumes we can get all of our comments resolved quickly, and so I'm optimistic we'll be able to do that.
We were shooting to have a real red line that reflects the majority of the comments, if not all of the comments, by April 11th. That's still a possibility.
I have to coordinate with David on that.
Right, assuming that that's our ask. So that April 15th, we have our first big bite of that big apple, not on the 29th, for exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. Any questions on the roadmap?
And then the other thing that you inserted into your schedule, which I think is worth calling out here, is that in order for Chris to make all these dates line up, we have to have all of our comments. If there's anything more or anything that you had that you're gonna die on that hill by April 18th.
Yeah, that's on the schedule. I didn't highlight. I meant to highlight it and put blinking lights around it.
Yes. So when you're thinking about your time and reviewing material, of course, you can't review until you receive, but that's how we're trying to line it up, that there is adequate time, but that there's also a deadline, and at some point, we just have to say it's good enough for now. And that's what we're hoping to have by April 18th, so that's why he's saying the 29th is sort of more just the formality.
Assuming that someone doesn't insert a comment on the 18th, it's dramatic.
Yes, that's true,
Okay.
yes.
We want those comments before.
Right. Fair
Typos
enough.
only.
Right.
Yes.
That said, we do want everyone to be in support or be able to live with, and
Do we have a deadline for David to just give us material?
I need to coordinate with David, and I'm working on that. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. If you want to go to the next slide.
Little circle there, did that all get
Oh,
covered?
yes, that's the shift of dates. So highlighting that, yeah, after the 18th. Great. So this is just also kind of like a reminder of what we were working on to address. So big thumbs up that we did address the site plan review issues. We did agree to include 4-unit dwellings to be exempt from site plan review. So that's big. You can advance the slide. So there should be a big check mark there. Yes. And so now if you want to advance the slide again, this is what we're working on tonight, is really drilling down on Riverside character-based zone, form-based code, section 13. You can go on to the next slide. All right, so a couple things about section 13. So when Chris Brown and I really started getting into looking at the frontage types and the building types, I really had a chance to dive in and totally reorganize the section. So there were, for example, like some things on lot sizes that were kind of in different sections, so now they're all grouped. The language was very academic, lots of heretofores and therewith, so cleaning all of that up. Entire sections have been deleted, so there's no more building frontages, no more lot layers. A lot of requirements remain unchanged. They'll just be easier to read and organized more logically. And then I want to put a little more greater emphasis on public space design. That's really critical in pulling everything together. And if we want to apply these to other areas in the future, that would be it's a good baseline if we want to work on streetscape guidelines for other parts of town or something like that. In terms of how it is organized now, it is going from big to small. So there's some general overview of what the regulations are, then defining the boundaries of the district, then talking about civic spaces, blocks, and thoroughfares. That's really setting the big framework for the neighborhood. Then going down to lot size and building placement. That's sort of the next piece down the list. Then some more practical things, vehicular access, parking, service. That's really critical in making sure you have a functioning site. You need to know where your access is going to be so you can design your buildings correctly. Then getting into building forms, types, and elements. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. And then there's some very specific things about materials, depth level of detail that comes next, and then the definitions. So there's a very logical flow that goes through now. So that's where we are with this.
Anybody object if I tried to roll that cart forward so that maybe we could see it better?
I can do that.
As long as they can see it also.
Yeah.
Can you?
Good idea.
can
Should be
you-
fine.
Like, you know, it's like a computer thing, can you do that, change anything dramatically, like at the top right? Are we in?
Yeah, we lost
How do you need one?
Full
I'm
screen
gonna go
mode?
around.
Okay.
I think it looks like it's in full screen because they have all this.
We're good. Let's do this.
Are you
That's
sure?
fine.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
This is the smallest font in the deck.
Okay, and you're all able to see
Yes.
better?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you see it, Heidi? If I need to switch, I will.
You know what was even bigger than that?
Mhm. So one of the questions, there are 4 questions tonight, more questions than I want, but there are 4 questions. One of the questions I've listed.
You think there are 4, but.
There are 4
Guiding
primary
questions.
guiding questions, yes. One of the questions is, how does this reorganization sound? Does it make sense? I'm assuming it's a thumbs up from everyone. Great. All right, any questions? Great.
On the organization.
Yes, specifically on the organization. Great,
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
great. You're welcome. Next slide. Oh, that's what we're focusing on tonight. Great. Okay, so what we are focusing on tonight, building types and elements. This is, so now you sort of understand where it is in the process of the code. So it's sort of like the nitty gritty when you're actually designing your buildings and that type of thing. So Chris Brown and I have worked on the building. So there are 2 parts. There's the building type requirements, and there are 6 types of buildings. I'll talk about that a little more. They're different sizes, shapes and sizes. Chris Brown and I looked at that to make sure there was greater variety. I think, Heidi, one of the questions you asked at the last meeting was, do we have all the right building types for all the types of housing that we want to have? And the answer is yes. So there's a single family home that doubles as a single family home up to a quadplex. There's a small apartment building, there's townhouses, there's mixed use. So those 4 types of buildings right now have the full range of types of housing we would want to see. Then there's also civic buildings and small commercial. There's a small commercial.
There was a flex, but there is no more.
Correct. We took the flex out. Yeah. It was similar to one of the other ones, and it just didn't really seems to be adding anything, and you know, it had more of an industrial character, and so we just took that out. There were some comments from other planning commission members through the process, like we really need it, doesn't seem to make sense, so we took that out. Frontage types. So The way it used to work was you would kind of pick your building type and then you had this menu, this frontage type you had to choose from. We've taken that out and we've replaced that with elements to choose from. I'll get into that a little more. It's expanding on that choose your own adventure idea. So we'll talk about that a little more. So now the building articulation, which is so important to getting that human scale, that's really being achieved through doors, windows, and then these elements that we're going to talk about. Form is really emphasized over architectural style. So we've had some discussion internally, like, do we want to include illustrations? Do we not want to include illustrations? I think illustrations are really helpful in making clear what the regulation is, but it's hard to give those illustrations without implying an architectural style. So that's the kind of push and pull there. There was also a question at the last meeting, concern about setbacks on Route 15. So we went through that process of actually measuring all the setbacks on Route 15. There's a pretty big range from 10, I think, up to 50, but there's a pretty nice chunk in the middle that's around 30. So we've increased the setback on Route 15 specifically to 30 feet.
And that's the minimum. When you say
That's the maximum.
maximum.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide. Yeah.
And that feels like I appreciate the data, but perhaps those patterns were established at a time when Route 15 wasn't what it is today. So does 30 feet feel like it makes sense for the context of Route 15 today? And I guess that's a question because it means nothing. Like I have no concept of what 30 feet is, but like I think that was the inherent nature of the conversation.
I don't have an answer for that. I think there are probably issues around noise and vibrations, and that is really going to get to like what's the quality of your windows. Things
I
like
think
that.
also there's a slight conflicting interests. So one interest is in maintaining a general sense of continuity with the setbacks so that it feels cohesive. But to your point, those houses were built, before it was paved, probably, I'm sure, obviously, before there were cars, probably, in some cases. And so, if they knew then that Route 15 was going to be a busy thoroughfare with tractor trailers, then they might have pushed their houses back further. But so I think there's an inherent conflict, but I think that the problem of Route 15 exists for all of those existing buildings, and the solution is not necessarily to make new buildings push back to 60 feet. It's to solve the problem of Route 15. So I think that the greater good is to maintain a sense of continuity, would be my answer.
Any other questions? I know you said you had a lot of questions.
I have a lot of questions, but
Okay,
I will shut them out.
interrupt whenever, yeah. All right, so for building types, I know I said the last slide had the smallest spot on it. This is not for you to read. This is more illustration of for each of the building types. Now there is a form like this that has all the information for that building type. So frontage, width, depth, what the setbacks are, what the building width and height would be, that just other information, which hopefully everyone had a chance to look at before the meeting. I already went through this before, but there's 6 building types: house, townhouse, small apartment, small commercial, mixed use, and civic. Like SJ noted, we have taken out the flex buildings. Building scale factors, that's sort of kind of what I just kind of went through. Building with lot coverage, side yard setbacks, heights, number of floors, number of units, and square footage. So this is how we have kind of worked, what we've looked through for the building type portion. If you want to go to the next slide. For the building elements. So the idea is now, by replacing frontage types, we now have a list of 15. That number may go up or down. We're kind of working through exactly what those elements would be. And the idea is that you would need to include at least 3 of those elements on your facades. So one of the questions tonight is 3 the right number? Is 3 the right number for just the street facing facades? What about side yards, backyard? Do we care? If we care, is 3 the right number? Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 1. Those are some questions. And I've got some illustrations in here to help us sort of think through that. So there we are. So, and I'll just go through what the 15 element types are that are on the screen. So arcade, that's sort of that open space at the ground floor that's pulled back. Balconies, bay windows, cornices, a courtyard, which is where you have a building and there's a larger inset, like 20 by 30 feet. Dormer windows was something that we added. Entrance marquee, that's a term that we kind of came up with. It's a more substantial canopy over a building entrance. So it's not like a fabric awning. It's something that's more integrated into the structure of the building. A multi-story porch that was previously called a gallery. Multi-story porch, I think, is more user-friendly. Office front is a provision just having more windows. I think a recessed entry is part of, well, it used to have more windows and a recessed entry. I'd have to look to make sure that again. We'd added pillar posts and columns, so some more architectural detailing. Another thought that I had after this went out was allowing for trim around windows and doors to count as an embellishment, and you'll see as an example why I think that should be added. Porches, recessed doorways, roof overhangs, storefront solar shades.
Is the solar shade an awning?
No, so what is not included on this list are awnings and canopies. Those are more ephemeral. Those can come and go. Shutters can come and go. So we did not want to include those as an element type. We wanted to include things that are really giving form and breaking down the scale of the building.
So it's not an sorry, if it's not an awning, is that like literally a?
You can do awnings and you can do canopies. They just don't count as one of your 15
So what is
elements.
But I mean, but what is?
Solar shade is a more
Oh, sorry.
solid material that is designed to block solar heat gain from the inside of the house.
Okay, but
You
it,
usually see them over individual windows or a string of windows.
It's
Oh,
a structure.
it's a structure.
On the-
Yes.
Yeah,
the
more and more
exterior.
structural.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, the nice thing about them is that, A, they can function really well to minimize solar heat gain, but they also break up the scale of the exterior of the building.
And they cast shadow. I mean, they do a lot to make a building facade more interesting.
Yeah, the building that uses them is the new building on Flynn Ave where Small Dog Electronics is now. That's like mixed use because it's storefront down below, apartments above, and all, it's facing west, so they all have the solar kind of slats.
Which work better on the south side.
Yeah, that's right.
So I know I've mentioned Chris Brown a couple times. He has really stepped up and done a lot of work with me on this, so I really appreciate that. Next I'm going to go into some examples of building types with the elements so we can kind of visualize it. But before we get into that, Chris, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about kind of anything I missed out, I left out that you think you should include.
Well, the fundamental concept, just to embellish that a little bit, is that the frontage types that we had before, they weren't required. Well, they were required, but they, not all of them. We would have gotten the buildings that we wanted from that, the way it was structured before. And I always felt like frontage types was pretty academic. Didn't feel super user-friendly to me. So the idea now is that we're giving people a list, and if they, I think 3 is a good minimum number, but if they use 3 of these things, and the examples that Chris did are helpful to see it, it really does get us what we want, which was to break down the massing, to be more pedestrian and human friendly. So I think it's fundamentally a better way of organizing, of getting what we want out of this section. And the other thing that's different is that the frontage types were by definition intended to be only on the front of the building, the street, main street facing front of the building. And I think that we should require these, with the exception of houses, we can, because Chris and I have talked about that a fair amount. But with the other buildings in here, I think we should require the elements, 3 of the elements on all sides. Because otherwise you will get the example that Wayne Ellis brought in last meeting. Because the front of that building probably may very well have 3 of these elements, but the example he brought in clearly didn't. And we, in Riverside, the back of a big building could very well be facing the front of somebody's front yard or their house or wherever. And so I think it's important that we require these on all sides. So we're still working on fine tuning this list of the 15 types, and we've been, sort of as Chris and I both are driving around thinking about what buildings in the community meet these requirements and what ones don't, and how we feel like these requirements are working or could work. So, but, yeah, I think that's.
I think it's fair to say, so we wrapped this up end of last week, sent it out. So you guys could look at it over the weekend. While we were driving around, looking at things, getting photos texted to me, comments on things. So we really wanted to jump into it yesterday, and we really held off till we had this discussion tonight, so that we can take feedback from the planning commission as well as the additional thoughts that we have had before we dig into it. So we actually have a meeting scheduled tomorrow morning, and we're going to do that after tonight's meeting. Two other,
Can I,
go ahead.
so sorry. So minimum of 3. You can do more. But anything structural that you do has to be renovated. You can't do something that isn't.
No, you can do
Unless
anything
it's-
you want,
Okay,
but the idea is that you would need to at least have 3 of these.
got it. Okay.
I think because I've thought about it, because a lot of the buildings that I like to do are not traditional. And so I've thought about, clearly these would all work with a traditional building. And so what I have been assigning myself the task of is thinking about how they would work with something that's not traditional. And would that allow for something that's not traditional? Because I think it's important that we be style neutral.
Okay, so this isn't restrictive, it's just you have to have at least 3.
I do not think it's restrictive.
Yeah.
And before we move on from this, can you just explain the bottom left? Okay, I got the fact that it replaces the frontage types. And I sort of understand all elevations must incorporate these 3 elements, meaning if there's more than one tier to a
No.
building.
No,
But that's
that's
the
not
part,
what that means.
that's exact, thank you, I need
So
you to
it means
explain
all
those 2
sides,
things.
all faces.
All faces,
So a typical building would have 4 faces, right?
So I have some examples that I think when we walk through will,
The word elevation is confusing.
Yeah, that
doesn't mean elevation going
Thank
up.
you.
It means the side that you.
those last 2 bullets were very
Yeah.
confusing to me.
So each element type will have a definition, right?
yeah, well, so what was in the packet, each of those element types has specific dimensions around it. So if you're gonna do a cornice, like it has to at least come out a foot. If you're gonna do a balcony, it has to at least come out 2 feet.
Right. So you don't get fake stuff.
Right.
Right,
But it's
that's
really breaking down the massing of the building.
I think the word towers in the chart. Is that,
That's been
And
taken out.
That should be not there. That should not be there.
okay.
Oh.
I'll forget I always thought it.
Please do. Yes.
Sorry.
One thing we did talk about, I think this is good to know. So we did talk about using a change of materials as a way of breaking down the scale of the building, because that can be a real effective way of doing it. And Wayne had an example.
Yeah.
That had a change of materials in the building that broke down the mass of the building. I think it takes, Chris and I talked about this, it takes some skill to do that. And we didn't want just to have that as one without a design review to making sure that it was being done well. you can still do it.
But I'm not quite ready to let go of it.
Okay,
So, because I think it's a really great strategy, it can be a great strategy, and Wayne's example was not great, but that was, I would argue that that was not the thing that was not great about it.
there were a lot of problems with that building, yeah.
So, anyway, I don't know how to do it, but I think there should be, anyway, we'll
We
talk
will
about it.
talk about it, 'cause there could be some criteria or guidelines around the change of
Right.
materials that,
Sometimes, if just a big industrial looking brick building that's like all brick, side to side, up and down is quite gorgeous. But that's what you're saying, choose your own adventure. Maybe my building, I wouldn't choose to change the materials,
Right,
but on a different building,
correct,
somebody might.
right.
any other questions before I get into these? Okay, great. Next slide. Okay, this is kind of fun. Okay, so we have, I think, 4 or 5 different building types, different sizes. Here's a
Rick's gonna be
rectangular house.
honest, but these are his designs and his drawings, so let's give him
Oh.
full credit.
So you did have fun.
I did have fun, yeah. So here is a 800 square foot home, typically 2 bedrooms. This has 3, this would qualify for 3 elements. So if you want to hit advance, so there is a stoop. It sounds like stoop seems kind of minor, but in a simple building, it really does make a difference. Next slide, window trim. So that if you look around, as you drive around, there are some buildings that don't have trim around the windows and ones that do. And the older houses have, and it really does make a difference. That's where the ornamentation is. And then a roof overhang. It required to have a foot overhang. That really makes a difference. You look at some buildings, the rake, which is what is on the side, sometimes it's flush and you don't really get any definition of the roof, there's no shadow. So these are 3 real simple things. So if you're trying to be cost conscious, these are some simple basic things you can do that's not going to break the bank.
But are you gonna talk about?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Oh,
well,
yes, yeah, go ahead.
Well, so what I was gonna say next is that the side of this little house does not meet our requirement of 3 elements. It has a roof overhang and it has window trim, but it does not have a 3rd element. But I think for a single family house, it's fine. So we've been discussing lowering the requirement on the sides and back of houses, of the house building type. Because I think that it's fine like that.
Great. Next slide.
But they could put a bay window here, I mean,
They could.
that would be the 3rd element on that side then, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Does it have to be the same 3? I mean,
Nope.
Okay.
But it doesn't need to be 3 different. If you can't have one cornice to the top and break it up into 3 pieces and say, I have 3 elements,
Yeah, okay.
But what about 3 bay windows?
that's one.
That's
Okay.
right.
So here's another example. It's a little bigger, 1,000 square feet, probably around, probably a 2 bedroom. Very modern, simple from an architectural style, it'd be international style, right? But here's an example of a modern building that meets all of our requirements. So if you want to go through the series, so there's the stoop on the front. I did draw the building, but this was actually Chris Brown's idea to have a stoop going over, something like that.
Nice.
This would probably an entrance marquee. And then the 3rd one is that would be a cornice up at the top. It's a contemporary modern cornice. It doesn't have to have the dental molding and all that kind of stuff, but it gives you that definition at the top of the building. So this has the 3 elements on the front. You were gonna say something?
Nope.
No, okay. Any comments on this one? Or
And then
questions about
the
this one?
side of this building, though, does stand out as being pretty plain.
Yes.
Minimal.
Minimal, yeah, okay.
Positive spin.
Okay.
Yeah, but I also think like the side yard requirements, you could have 2 houses next to each other with 2 5-foot side yards where you'd have 10 feet between the house. So you're really not gonna have these long views at a building like that.
Right, yeah.
All right, next slide. So this is an 1,800 square foot home. 1,800 square feet is the median size of a home in the state of Vermont. So it's typical housing. It is traditional. So typically be 3 bedrooms. So if you want to go through the 3, so first there's a porch on the front. Next there's a roof overhang. So you've got that 1 foot roof overhang, and then this has a dormer window on the top. Even if you had the windows that were plain, you've got these other 3 elements that are giving you some visual interest to the building. Do you want to say anything about this one, Chris? No.
No.
Yeah, but this one's just interesting because the sides have nothing on them. But I don't know if you really noticed that. I intentionally did not put like wood siding or materials on the building. Because we're really looking at the elements that are trying to break down the massing of the building. Next one. So this is a mixed use building. This is around 13,000 square feet. This would be 3,200 square foot retail on the ground floor. So that could be up to 4 retail spaces. Typically what happens on a building like this is it's built as just one big space. And as your tenant, as the economy ebbs and flows, you either have a large retailer or you can chop it up into more flexible. This has 3 stories of residential, assuming that it's an 800 square foot 1 bedroom apartment, that would be 12 residential units, or you could have a 2-bed, a small 2-bedroom at 800 square feet. So this is 12 units, so that would be 4 on 4. This has recessed entries on the ground floor, so that's helping define that street level experience. There are balconies across the facade, and then there's a cornice up the top. So another thing that Chris and I have talked about is how do we make sure these things aren't just all concentrated at the corner of a building? So there'll be a requirement that the elements are evenly distributed across the building. We'll probably need to come up with some criteria for that so that the zoning administrator can use that, can objectively evaluate what that means.
How long is that building?
This is 80 by 40.
But this is an example of the side elevation of that building only has 2 elements. And I think might start to get to be at a scale and massing that is not necessarily what we want. So I
Because
think the
this
larger
building is much bigger,
It's
you're
much
saying?
bigger, it's much bigger, and so
It would benefit from
it
having
benefits from
additional
something else.
element.
Now, if this were actually, this is, as it's drawn, it's on a corner. The blank facade, if it's street facing, I would want it to have at least 3 elements on it. But if it's mid-block, I don't know how important that is. Maybe it is important, maybe to have 2, 3 still. We were looking at a building in Richmond on Bridge Street, older.
Can I ask about older? What about the new one that was just put in next to the
Oh,
blue steel? How does
Brick
that
building.
size fit compared to this? Like,
it's probably roughly similar, I would think. It's
Similar?
longer, I don't think it's 4
it's
floors.
like skinnier and longer.
Or longer, clearly longer than this.
Well, I was thinking of the one, the old connected Main Street. There's one on the corner that is really tall and has a lot of ornate. It's almost like, don't make fun of me, Chris. I want to say it's Richardsonian. It's very loosely Richardsonian. Aspirational, right? Arches and some brickwork, right? I assumed that, because we wanted to think, we were looking at some examples, and I assumed that that would just be on the street facade, but it actually goes all the way around the building. I think unusual. Okay, we've got one more. All right, so this is actually the same size as the last building. But instead of having recessed entries at the ground floor, it has show windows that project out 2 feet. And if you look at the elements, there are some limits on how long they can be. So I think the idea is that their aggregate width is unlimited, but each one individually couldn't be more than 20 feet. So it's breaking up, giving you that pedestrian scale on the ground floor. It's got a cornice at the top, and then it's got dormer windows on the top. So again, 3 elements. I did the math, and I think that these windows are at the percentage requirement for window openings. Yeah, they're evenly spaced, which isn't a requirement, but if they were to be, this is meeting those requirements. This is the last example, and they had, oh, well, I'm gonna go to my 4 questions. So do you have other questions before we get into that?
I have questions about the building types and the standards around them.
Okay.
And then I have some broader, just like I said, kind of planning 101 questions that relate to it.
Okay. We will get to all of that. So of my 4 questions, the first was, does the reorganization of section 13 make sense? Yes, thumbs up. The second is, do changes to the building types and proposed element types? Is it maintaining what we think is most important? Is it sufficiently simplifying the code? Everyone seems to have liked this approach. So I want to assume it's a thumbs up, but there will be a discussion. Are we good with the direction that we're going? Everyone's nodding. Great.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so. Great, those are the 2 big questions. The other questions are more detailed. They get more into like the specific regulations. And that is 3 elements on each facade the right number? Should the number of required elements depend on the type or size of the building? Chris, are there any other nuances to those questions that you would want to have asked to help us when we get together tomorrow?
I don't think so. I think that the other thing that we've done is written a little descriptive paragraph, a narrative at the start of this, which we may want to embellish a little bit, but I think it would be important to describe to the DRB and the zoning administrator what we're looking for, what the goal is, so that they have, when they look at a project that's being submitted, they can see and think to themselves, is this achieving that goal? And that there would be some, there could be a dialogue between the reviewer and the applicant. The applicant would say, this is how I'm achieving that goal, and so that there could be even some flexibility that, because fundamentally, it's just really hard. You can't regulate taste. And so we need to sort of capture the idea of what we want, and then try what we're trying to do. We can't regulate taste, but what we're trying to do is raise the floor, so that we're trying to avoid stuff that really just isn't nice, and trying to establish a baseline of what we have there. So
yeah, and I know I said this at the last meeting. You can't regulate good design, but you can do things that help you not get really bad design. And that's kind of what, I mean, it's a horrible goal, but I mean, it's like.
But design, bad design or good design, it's really from the lens of what planning professionals know produce economic prosperity and walkability and engaged neighbors and good quality of life. It's not because we like this building or that building. It's because when these things are broken down, when the environment is interesting, when there's texture, then people are drawn to it.
it's not stylistic.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
design, I think, can be a loaded term, and I probably should have queued this up a little more at the beginning, but the goals of the Riverside Code is to create a human-scaled, pedestrian-friendly environment where you want to spend time, you want to walk around, you want to feel comfortable. you typically don't feel that way if you're walking along a building with a blank wall. Right? You need things that break down the scale of the building. And not every building needs to be the Taj Mahal. There is a civic building type. Ideally, your civic buildings or certain buildings are really what stand out. And a lot of what gets built, they're more background buildings. You still want those background buildings to have a good scale that let those really good buildings shine and stand out.
So I wonder if it's possible to, there are a couple of things that I just heard you say that move away from the idea that it looks good or it's nice design. That in terms of the goals that we probably want to be very clear about articulating is that it's about offering a range of options to people who are building to have with an affordability at different price points and stylistic elements of their choice. Right? And so I think there's a way of sort of framing that in is what I've seen you do. That is not about imposing taste or imposing something else. That I think is important to say in what the goals are. Because not everybody's going to care about walkability. Not everybody's going to care about the other things, but to say that we're creating, the goal is to create a community that's walkable, and these forms enable you to choose your adventure based on your price point and your stylistic desires. And I think like I could hear a statement like that and not feel like it's an overreach, which I think is really important for us not to be overreaching in regulating and whatnot. And feeling like I do have some options for self-defining.
Yes, I think it's very fair to say that the element list of options is not burdensome financially, but we also need to acknowledge that you could do a cheaper building if you didn't require any of those.
Indeed.
So, and we see a lot of those around, but I think it's okay, in my opinion, and appropriate that we don't want to scrape the bottom. We would like to aim a little bit higher. And again, I don't think that those elements are necessarily burdensome from a cost perspective. So,
Well, and when I looked at those examples, the 1,800 square foot 3-bedroom is exactly the size that Green Mountain Habitat for Humanity is building for a single family detached house. That's the size that they're building. And I think that all of those, I was just kind of cycling through some of their recent homes in my mind, and I think that they would all fit.
especially,
That 3-element need.
and I think it would be fine if we only required 3 on the street face of a house, of a house type, and not on the other sides. But most houses that you see would have 3 anyway. So,
I have a question about that. So there's not a direct association between uses and building types, right? So even though the prologue to each building type kind of describes typical uses for this building type. So for example, I want to build a new lawyer office. I could see small town lawyer, I could see wanting to choose the house type for my lawyer office. I can do that, right? Because there's not a direct association between use and
Is that
building
true?
type.
That's correct.
Okay, so the housing type isn't tied to a residential use. It's just because it's a building type, not a
Right.
use type.
And as it's described, it's described as for being from a single family up to a 4-unit small apartment building.
Right, but it could also be a small business.
It could be commercial on the ground floor and 2 units upstairs. I mean, there's no restriction on how
Right,
it's used.
so I think when you're working on the descriptions, to make that clear also.
Important.
Yeah.
then it's adaptable for use.
Right, or, you know, a childcare or a
That-
bakery
That's the
or,
fundamental premise of form-based code.
right.
The only difference, I think, is the mixed-use building and the the small commercial building. It's not required, but I think it just assumes that your ground floor is gonna be retail on those.
But it's not required because
It's
if
not
I wanted
required.
to build, if I wanted to build an apartment building, I would potentially use the other.
You probably do a
Building
small apartment building.
But if I wanted to build a larger apartment building, I would use the mixed use building
Correct.
type, even though technically it's not a mixed use.
Correct.
That's really confusing.
Yeah.
Like, that's not intuitive. I would not have known that without this conversation.
Well, I think
Indeed, like, with so for the mixed use, the minimum number of units was mixed use. And my immediate thought was, the minimum number of units for mixed use is 2. And I was like, oh, that must be because one has to be residential and one has to be commercial. So the absolute minimum is 2.
Or maybe one is office and one is entertainment.
Yeah,
So that would
yeah.
count as mixed use too.
Well, and I don't think I would have known that if you hadn't asked that question.
Right, so I think that those descriptions will be important.
Well, and also because I think that though, and I might be wrong, but I think that those terms I would have to look at the definitions in the definition list to see if how mixed use is defined in our definition. Right? Do you know what I mean? Like,
So Chris and I talked about. So the different building types, what the different building types are really doing is it's getting to the scale of the buildings itself, because those have minimum and maximum lot sizes, those have minimum, a minimum and maximum, actually, some don't have minimum frontage, facade fronts. So what that is really, the importance of the building types is getting that the overall size of the building.
although
Not
the
the stuff that's
small
on it.
apartment and the mixed use, I think the way that I was thinking about it was that the facade voids are different in those buildings because mixed use is commercial space on the bottom. And so that's why there's the facade void difference for the mixed use type versus the small apartment, which has a void space that's more similar to the residential.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm willing to do that void on the ground floor, say, because I want to build a bigger apartment building and I want like a cool lobby and a pool table and a bike rack and a this and a that, and it's okay for me in my design to have a decent sized void, as long as I meet that void requirement, can I use the mixed use building type if I have a single use? Because like SJ's pointed out, it says now 2 uses, and maybe that's what we do want to require. I didn't mean to bring us down a rabbit hole.
No.
It's just-
Well, what I was thinking was we have a requirement that if you go for the ground floor, and I have to see if it's for certain types of windows, but you have to be able to see into the space at least 8 feet.
Right, so that's why I'm saying though, you could have some public space
Yeah.
that's not
Or
commercial
lobby or your
space,
gym, or-
right?
Yeah.
Then you couldn't do,
And let me just, one more thing, that it's like the reason why there's that 8-foot sight line into the building, because if you don't have something like that, you're gonna get a CVS or a Walgreens that's gonna maximize its shelf space and put all of its shelves up against the outside walls of the building. And they may have a show window or something on the front and put stuff in it, but you're just gonna be looking at the back of a shelf from the street, and that's not achieving the goal of getting that nice pedestrian experience that we want.
My brain went somewhere else, so I apologize that this could be like totally in left field, but I got stuck with the definition of mixed use. And, I almost wonder if it's even useful and necessary. So we don't have to discuss it. I need to go back and look because where my brain went right now is if one could use any building form or size for multiple uses, does it make sense to label one kind of building a mixed use building?
I think that's a really good comment, and I wrote that down. My question was, is mixed use really the right name for that?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering if it's because it's confusing. I think it makes sense as a mixed, conceptually for the neighborhood or the community that we're looking for a variety of forms and buildings that can be used in multiple ways and promote a combination of commerce and living space and whatever, entertainment, but maybe not connected to a particular building. I don't know.
It could be as simple as reducing the number of, or it could be as simple as clarifying the text.
Yeah,
To say
that's what
that
I'm thinking.
it doesn't need to be more than one use,
Mhm.
but it can be, because it's not, a townhouse is strictly residential. And so I think it would be nice to encourage the idea that ground floor could be commercial. But we fundamentally want housing, and so,
And I
mean,
think those building descriptors we have, I think, are a holdover
Right,
from the existing code.
right.
and to that point, we might, in the text, say, it doesn't have to be more than one use, but there has to be residential. Because I think the goal, and
In a mixed use building.
nobody's gonna build a 3-story office building in Riverside, it's not gonna happen, but the point is to get
Right.
housing.
I mean, I have
So-
seen form-based code that requires no single story. I've seen form-based code that require new parentheses to commercial ground floor, 100%, and residential, and residential upper floor, 100%.
I don't think, given that we're a veteran community, I don't know that it's appropriate to require ground floor commercial.
Right, I agree. I'm just saying there is, it's very common for form-based code to require that.
That makes sense.
And ours is at the moment not.
That came up when I was on the St. Albans tour, at the meeting that Heidi and I went to, that they had to retroactively go back and allow residential on the ground floor where it hadn't been allowed before.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal to them to kind of step back.
Because their code didn't allow it.
And that, yeah, for whatever that block or area was, it was, or it was a pre-existing use or something like that, but whatever the reason was, it wasn't permitted and they wanted it to happen that way, so.
Except if someone wanted to do a performing arts building, would that be mixed use, or would that be a small, that could be a small commercial?
Depending on the scale.
Yeah, okay.
But in
Oh,
reading this, I was thinking about, okay, so why are we capping the small apartment at 12? And I was like, oh, okay, so if you want to have more than 12 apartment, more than 12 units, then you have to go to a mixed use. And you have to have a commercial, but no, you don't have to necessarily have a commercial. Really, it is just the scale of the building. And so once you get to that scale, then in a building that large, then you do want to think of your facade voids differently, and you do want to think of what's going to be like that. That makes some sense to me. So yeah, it's just the name. And also, I think because we are, because we're working from the original code, being really clear that home businesses can happen in residential space.
Yes.
And that's not prohibited, just to be crystal clear about it, because it currently, there's some wild restrictions on that.
Right, like you were talking about townhouses, and I instantly went like, oh, I could have a medical building, and I might want to do townhouses, because I might want to have dentist, pediatrician, rehab, like, and a townhouse might be, I mean, other than the stairs, might be a really nice, format for that, as an easy way to break down the form into something very friendly but cohesive that's not residential.
I have an element question, which is, are signs? What do we think about signs? Yeah, we do. Signs. I feel like signs is kind of a hot button issue in Jericho. And I'm wondering about, is that an element, or does that fall under some other purview?
I don't think that should be an element, because I think that's transitory. So I think we want something that's more permanent.
So if there were an issue around signs, it would show up in a different part of the
Is my question.
There is
And that's
no
the part that already
separate
exists.
sign code for Riverside. There is one addition about no monument signs or something like that. But other than that, it just refers to section
7 something.
X.
Okay.
Yeah.
Townwide.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay, that was my building type question, was kind of getting at the uses. So before we go to question 3 and 4, do other people have other questions on building types and elements that we haven't already discussed? Okay,
I have a building type question.
okay.
So, and again, like this minutia is maybe just I sit down with the Chris's and y'all give me a lesson on things. And so maybe we don't have to go through the minutia of what I did in looking through this is like, okay, I want to do this kind of infill, or I want to do a cottage court, or I want to, how can I do infill within this is where I was coming from. And there's a reference in the new language to a secondary buildings on a lot should be designed to be similar in quality and style to principal buildings, but are not required to have a minimum of 3 element types. Fine, but then that got me to a place of, first of all, what is a secondary building? Because it's not defined anywhere, and so then I went down an outbuilding rabbit hole, and I got myself all confused and have a bunch of questions and comments about it. But ultimately, it is this question of, so if we do, because this does include parcels that are already developed residentially but have space for infill, for other buildings, for potentially some of these lots are really deep, and so you might want to do buildings behind. Like, how do I do that given these options? How do I do that with the frontage requirements that are there and with some of the setback requirements? Like, I just don't understand how I follow the rules and do those things, and are they different building types? So would I need to be thinking about those as outbuildings or a back building? Or if I can have 2 principal buildings on a lot, but the only place I can fit my second principal is behind, but I'm not going to meet my frontage requirements because I won't have any frontage because I'll be behind the principal that has the frontage. Like how do I do? So that's kind of,
you put it on a lot in a way that.
Yeah. So that's kind of, and or like, do these not apply to that kind of infill? So that was where a lot of my questions were coming from, was trying to do some of these infill exercises and getting stuck on not being sure how to do it. And I understood and I heard 2 weeks ago that it is allowed and that there should be a lot of flexibility, and that's awesome. I just want to make sure that I understand how, because it wasn't clear to me.
I don't think there's anything that would prohibit you from doing that, with the possible exception of how you would get to that building. Because we looked, when we were Chris and I were reviewing this, we looked at the site plan of Riverside, and we looked at both the existing and Tetra's proposed plan, and we were thinking about, because some of those lots are really long and deep.
Yeah.
And so I don't think,
So if I'm in the back of a building, how do I have frontage and how do I meet that setback? I would be further back from the maximum.
well, we were,
setback.
as we talked about it, we were thinking, maybe not correctly, but thinking that there would be streets that don't exist now that show up in Tetra's plan that would get you to those lots. So that those long skinny lots, you could divide those up, and you could have a little street there. We talked about cottage courts.
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. So what you're asking about is now in section 13.4, which you haven't seen it yet unless you looked at the
I
old.
looked at the old one. Well, I started here and then I went to
in
the
a
old one.
couple
to
different
try and get some
places, yeah.
answers. Yeah.
So now there's a section that's on lot size and building placement.
Mhm.
So that talks about principal buildings and outbuildings. And if you can connect an outbuilding to a principal building. And it used to be, what was it called? It was called a back, whatever it was called.
Yeah.
We changed it. So now I think it's a connecting building or something like that.
But you don't have to connect them.
You don't have to connect them. What would limit you is that the outbuilding it has to be secondary in size.
So you can't have two principals.
It needs to be small. Correct. I believe that's correct. And then you would need to still comply with your lot coverage and then your setback requirements.
But your setback requirement is any building on the lot from the property line, right? It's not building to building.
Correct.
So that,
But so if I'm on 15 and I'm at my maximum, my house, my principal is 20 feet from 15, so I'm not even at the maximum yet. But then I'm gonna put a building behind it. That building behind it is now gonna be
way more than
30 feet from
That's okay.
the frontage.
Because
is.
because it's behind,
It's an outbuilding.
it's an
If
outbuilding.
it's an outbuilding,
So you're right, but
so-
what if it's a second principal building?
And it is in here somewhere that you can have a second principal.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think, well, no, because you can't do PUDs.
Right.
Can I
So
make
maybe
a
you guys need to
suggestion?
think about that.
But the other question would be, well, we haven't really addressed parking, but what the parking situation is.
Yeah.
And relative to, because you're assuming, and quite possibly that if you can't get a vehicle access to the back building, then the person back is, maybe they don't have a car, which is totally fine. But that would be something that we would need to think about.
I would love to suggest in that this is a great idea to ensure, because a lot of what has been done here, I think in many ways we've been thinking about the big open lots as opposed to the boundaries that have now been drawn, which include existing older lots and housing. And so maybe as you do your work in this next iteration is draw out this scenario of what infill.
So I can tell you,
Yeah.
so it's on River Road, there's a subdivision that is currently being processed, it's been approved by the DRB, and they are putting in alleys, and they're putting in lots on the back of the property that don't seem to make any sense until you look at Tetra's plan, which has a street, and the section of that street has no lots on it, and these lots are fronting that. So the properties around the road grid that's been approved is using that and building off of it and subdividing their properties in a way that is furthering these.
But aren't we talking about properties that are also on the other side of
Yeah.
15 that don't butt up against that and that are further down? I mean, I understand, and I know exactly which one you're talking about.
There's not much on the other side of 15. that
So actually,
seems-
my brain went to a different place, and I'm gonna just, again, it's just about recognizing time and sort of what are the big issues that need to be worked out that may not be able to be done in this moment. But I think there's the difference between a big development with multiple houses and lots of things happening, and the individual homeowner who has, because if we are making any other changes, that now allows them to make some changes on their one existing lot, but they are now in the form-based code zone. What for that individual homeowner in addition to what for the developer?
And I would add on to Heidi's
Right.
that I think it would be important not to always think that of subdivision.
Right.
Because people lease land and you don't always have to subdivide to get multiple houses or multiple neighbors. There's lots of different financial models, and subdivision increases the cost, it increases the fragmentation. It shouldn't be like I know it's the most common 95% of the time, but it shouldn't be the only way that anything works.
Yeah, so it could be, I think that maybe, and it may or may not go into the regulations as we're designing them, but I do think sort of building on is like, just a little, like in business, they always do like a little scenario planning, like walk through, like you were talking about SJ, I think that was brilliant. Walk through a couple of different scenarios as someone who wants to enhance the value and housing or property on the land, whether it's a single parcel or multiple parcels, and so it's infill versus completely something new. I think that might be helpful for us to be able to say, oh yeah, we've caught it all, right? But it also would be very useful to, I would think, for the DRB or for Chris Lynn to say, oh, this is my starting point, this is the scenario we're working with. So here are the specific things that we could anticipate are going to come up as questions, or where to find it in the code or whatever. I just think it would make it, again, with this idea of moving towards user-friendly and clear and simple. That is one way to make sure we've both planned it appropriately and communicated appropriately.
My sense, after looking through all of this, is that it does all of this.
Oh, good. Okay.
But I don't have those answers on the tip of my tongue, and I want to go back and have those answers so that we know for sure. But my sense is that it does all of that.
Right, and it might be easy enough for you to just put it on a slide, which then becomes an addendum to the code or something, right? So that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions on building types or elements?
Well, I had a question about outbuildings, which is, do we care what the outbuilding is? And I'm thinking specifically of the fabric soft-sided garage or storage units that people have.
I like those round canopy things. Does that count as an outbuilding?
Do we care about regulating that or not?
I don't know if they are regulated now. I don't know if it's
yeah, I think
temporary.
Chris, I would say no.
Okay.
I would say for a overstepping place and from an affordability place and for a few like equity issues, I would say we do not touch that.
And then let me also state
But
that I
that's
don't.
really strong and just quick, so you can argue
No, that's
something
fine.
totally different.
I don't have a position. It occurred to me today. I don't have a position. No.
Let me also state, because it hasn't been stated, but I don't know if it's understood or not. The element requirements only apply to the principal building.
Right.
They do not apply to the outbuilding.
Okay,
And
is an
that's-
ADU, if I'm building an ADU in a separate building in Riverside, that separate little building is considered an outbuilding?
There's something in the regulations that refers to an ADU, and I just can't remember what it is right now.
Okay, so
Okay.
you'll check that out and whether or not this form elements will be required.
Well, we know that
They're not required.
They're not, okay, for an ADU.
Right now, there's wording that an outbuilding or maybe we had ADU is
quality and character, but there's not a specific requirement for any of the elements.
Thank you for that clarity.
I have two more, I have one clarifying, and then I have one more bigger question, which you can again kind of, I don't know, like. My one clarifying question is, a driveway is part of your coverage. So you have to have the minimum side setback in addition to your driveway. Right? So like you got your driveway, but that's coverage. So you still need your 3 feet
You
or your
can,
5
I believe
feet.
you can have your driveway in a side yard setback.
You can. Okay, that doesn't need extra space. Okay.
And the lot coverage, we will clarify if it needs to be clarified, but that should be the amount of impervious surface. Because it's really important to understand how the built environment relates to natural events.
So the material of your driveway might determine whether it counts as your maximum
Yes.
coverage. Fascinating. Okay. And then my last big question, coming off the density amendment, is about density and how it's handled here, such that it, I believe, is not included in table, whatever the table is. I don't remember. But you know what I say? That there's language in here somewhere that says density here is treated differently than what's spelled out in the table, or something. Or am I wrong?
I don't have that section of the red line, but I believe that we are having no density caps. We're doing away with density caps in all village
All
centers.
village
So currently, Riverside in the current code has no density limits at all.
Okay, and that's
And the new stuff won't change that.
And the only lot size restriction is on the width. So there's no,
Maximum.
the maximum width.
maximum width. So there's no minimum, and there's no
Right.
minimum lot area. And
So you
so,
could have a really tiny English little house and a little tiny lot.
so should part of this then, or will there also just be that column in the table is just deleted?
Which column in the table?
The village
It's for-
center column in the 5.6. I understand that it's not in 13, but
Well,
to make
so
sure that this is all consistent.
to remove the column for all the village centers will be part of this red line.
Okay.
Because we have discussed it and concluded that we thought that that was a reasonable change to
But
make.
we're doing them
But that's not-
specifically.
Right,
Because each village center has its own column now, right?
right.
Okay.
So,
This is before my time. So
but I
that's
would
why
say
I
that,
just,
that decision,
yeah.
I feel should be confirmed. As lots of the decisions, like I don't want to keep reopening decisions, but I also don't want to feel backed into a corner. Like 4 months ago, we decided that, no. The thing to me is not decided until we warn for a public hearing. And not that everything's up for grabs, because we're kind of trying to move forward.
Yeah.
But, it's like a domino effect. If we do something here that changes how we thought about something 3 months ago,
Yeah.
I want to have that opportunity.
Yes, and I love that you're tracking that because I am not close enough, honestly, to say that I would remember that we did something that would impact that. And so thank you for being
Yeah.
able to
So that was David's proposal,
Great,
was
thank
to not have any density limits in the village center, because I think that comes from the Zoning for Better Neighborhoods Guide. And, which is why, though, Chris has asked the question, are there, not to use the word elements, are there portions of what we're doing for Riverside that would make sense in the other village centers, given that they would have no density caps?
What is regulating density are the setbacks
Yeah.
and the building height and the lot coverage. And if you're not on, if we get municipal sewer and if we get municipal sewer and you're not on municipal sewer, then your sewer capacity.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have like a Jericho, Vermont sewer capacity t-shirt. It's just like, that is the limiting factor for me. Well, I guess in water.
At this time.
Right,
Yes.
that we know of so far.
Okay, thank you. Those were my,
Okay, so now can we move on to the 3 elements question?
yeah.
Yes. I've already asked the question. I need to have an answer.
Okay. I thought your examples showed that 3 elements on the principal facade make a lot of sense. And I think Chris's point about potentially not requiring 3 on the smallest building, which is the house, but maybe 2, but then 3 on each of the facades for the other building types. Made sense to me because all your examples were very logical and felt comfortable.
Yes, and I have one elevation of my house that doesn't have any of those elements. Doesn't have a roof overhang,
Right.
doesn't have trim, doesn't have bay windows, doesn't have
I don't know.
anything. It's perfectly human scaled, pedestrian friendly.
Right, because your building is of a certain size and a certain nature. That's,
Well-
oh, so you're saying on a house
Just,
could be 0?
well, I think I'm
If you're not facing a street.
thinking that because mine wouldn't pass. And I don't think that that's,
It is the eyesore of Jericho.
Well, you're in a really rural area.
no, but even if I wasn't, I would argue that
No, it's
my one
beautiful.
end elevation, it has windows, it has, it's not out of scale, it's not, it just doesn't, but it doesn't have roof overhang, it doesn't have,
Is a window an element?
no. So I had 0 elements.
Yeah. So you'd say your counter to that is that 3 on each facade, however, you think a house should be allowed to have 0 on.
I think that my feeling would be that on the house type, the front primary elevate facade needs to have 3, and that the other sides, I don't think need to have any
Street facing facade.
street facing facades.
Okay, and then-
Anyway, and because, and also bearing in mind that no one's gonna build a building
Right.
without a window.
Right. Okay, that makes sense to me. Then what would you, then what's your recommendation on the other building types?
On the other building types, I think all sides need to have 3. That would be my opinion. I don't think it's onerous, and I think it will give us, especially on a big building, that's what we want.
Right.
But I would also, I think with the language in the description, the introductory section, if someone has a 2-story building that's not massive, and they have a back elevation that has 2, and they can make a good argument that it's still meets the spirit of the laws.
So would that be a relief that could be granted?
They could go to the DRB or the zoning administrator or the DRB.
Well, we have that relief table, so it would seem like that would have to be specific in the relief.
Well, the
table.
relief table is just what the zoning administrator has the authority to approve without going to the DRB. Chris Brown could propose his house in Riverside. It would just need to go to the DRB and go through that process.
But then the DRB needs criteria from the
They wouldn't like my
regulations. Well, they would need regulations to be able to determine that his house is fine being with that blank wall because it's super cool
It's
and
not
nice,
blank.
but, I know, sorry, but without
Just
those
elements,
elements.
right.
But this other one is not, so what would the criteria be? I guess it seems like you guys have thought about it the most. I kind of defer. But, I think the most important thing is that it's really getting at the goal.
Well, it gets squishy. And I don't think there's any way to avoid it getting squishy.
Mhm.
But I think if we have the introductory paragraph with a narrative that clearly describes what our objectives are, then I think reasonable people can come to a reasonable conclusion about something that makes sense.
Yeah, I would want to make sure that there are affordable options for all sides. So I think by like adding a door and window trim, like you have to have trim around all your doors and windows, like that and the roof overhang. I think you can see from that one small house that makes a difference, and that would be an affordable option for someone to at least have two on a facade.
On the bigger buildings, or are you talking about on a house?
I was just kind of putting that out there as to think about. I think my comments would make the conversation go longer.
I wonder if, I love that you introduced this to us saying, you did all this work and then you've been driving around and really like pressure testing it actually by looking at things, right? And so you've had that opportunity, and I feel like I haven't had that opportunity. So, and I love that you've had it and you've had the chance to like bring something that seems very reasonable to me, but I want to pressure test it without giving you an answer tonight. So my answer tonight is please go forth with all the great thinking you've done already. Let me see some photos. Let me go do the pressure testing and be open to answering this question next time. Like, will it put us really far behind in our schedule if we answer this 3 facade, what's the right number question?
So what I think is going to happen to keep us on schedule is that
Yeah.
we're going to take feedback from tonight and we're going to think some more, and we're going to come back with a more definitive, like, this is what the recommendation is.
Okay.
Does that sound right, Chris?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you have input, if you drive around, it would be helpful probably to email that input to Chris
By the end of the week.
before,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
so
Yeah.
that they can incorporate
I'm
it.
happy to do that. I just feel like it's so theoretical, and
Right.
I need some visuals to be able to.
But it does sound like the last question, should the number of elements depend on the type and size of the building? That seems sort
That's
of
a clear
logical.
yes.
Yes.
That's a clear yes.
Yeah, that's a clear yes.
So I wish I had thought to do this before the meeting. And maybe I will try to send this out after this meeting. So at the beginning of section 13, there is a purpose and intent. Now,
Right.
Chris and I are going to work on the intro part, but there is A through K, which includes things like providing housing with a range of types, size, and arrangements that accommodate all household ages and incomes. So there are a number of things like this, and really we should be making sure that every regulation that we have is reinforcing A through K, and that one of A through K actually has a regulation that is somehow reinforcing it. Because if it's not, then we shouldn't have it listed.
And that was in 13, the intro
Well-
to 13.
You haven't gotten it yet, right? The old.
Well, I think it's in the existing code. I can give you that number. But you should look at that. If you want to look at something before you drive around, I think that would be helpful to look at. And then really look through the elements list and like look at the dimensions. Like, for example, the roof overhang, like Chris and I had a discussion, like should it be 6 inches, should it be a foot?
Yeah.
You know, it's 6 inches, but as you drive around and you see, you can kind of think about what is it?
I mean, you think like, who cares about an overhang? But an overhang is an element that protects the siding of the building and has, handles rainwater, and so it can enhance the longevity of the building. It's not just an aesthetic thing.
And you guys are editing A through K to be consistent with this.
Yeah, I just
It's
looked in the
not.
code and I don't actually see it in 13. That might be something that
I
they
think
did.
that was
I'm
new,
looking
yeah.
at
It's
13.3.
it's essentially the mission statement for what we're trying to do at Riverside.
Yeah.
But I will send that out after the meeting
Okay.
tonight, so you have it.
That would be very helpful.
But one of the comments that I made was that there's like the preamble stuff, and it's like, this has no regulatory effect. And then there's like the intro stuff that has regulatory effect, and my question to David was, why do we need a preamble that has no regulatory effect? And then repeat all the same thing. Get rid of anything that's too superfluous and just, you know, sure, we can have an intro, but if we're repeating it, we don't need it twice.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, it's getting late, so I think that we should make time for public comment.
I just want to, before we do that, I just want to kind of do a summary here.
Okay.
So there's confirmation, I think, that 3 elements make sense, definitely on the street-facing facades. There's definitely,
Primary street facing.
yeah, there's definitely consensus that size and type of building matters, and we're going to kind of do their own truth testing, but Chris Brown and I are going to think a little more, and we'll have something when we come back next time. Other issues to follow up on, ADU versus outbuilding, that kind of whole outbuilding principle, building coordination thing. Looking at how the code impacts small developers' infill development, just sort of confirming that we've got that base covered. Mixed use, it's probably not the best name for that building type, so looking at that. And then as we're making edits, making sure it's clear that uses are not related to the building type. So those are like the big things I heard tonight. Is there anything I missed that you can think of? Okay, great, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Nope, thank you. Good wrap. Okay, public comment, 3 minutes, please. I know.
I can do less than that.
Okay, good, but you have to say your name.
And you have to come
Come
notice
forward,
that
they
the
can't
other
hear you.
meetings, so you can't be hurried in.
Bill Butler, Wisdom House. This building, okay, first I'll start out. The town has mandated that we provide senior housing. I mean, this is like number 3 of importance on the town survey, I think. This building is 100 by 300 feet long. Are you telling us that we can't build this building? Yes, you're saying we can't, right? So we should just leave and forget it, right?
I don't think that's, if you're just looking at the, oh, sorry.
Well, that was me, I wrote this on this was another one of my minutia questions that I'm gonna hit you all up with tomorrow. But, where did I write it? Wisdom House. Oh, maximum frontage width 150. What are you at?
300 by 100.
100.
See, that's this building which we've been showing you for the last
It's
3
been
years.
designed so the long face is street facing. The whole point, the whole design of the building.
And how many square feet?
What,
Floor area?
100 by 300.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, this is what we think we have to make in order to provide the services for, a central service for seniors. Is this kind of concept. I mean, if we can't do it, I don't think we should even be bothering. I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that you're excluding us from, and this idea. But it's what the town is asking you to do.
What I was asking about, thinking about your building, can you show your picture again? So your building, to me, potentially looks like 2 or 3 or 4 buildings.
Yes,
With 0 setback between them.
yes.
And
But we have atrium in the middle, so it's not like we can create walls.
Right, so I did ask about, like, what defines it something in Riverside as a single building versus as a cluster of multiple buildings, and I think that that's something that we want to look at, because what you've done is what the code is requesting, which is, it's not just one big blank wall.
We have all
It
these
does-
intricacies of
Right,
the facade.
it reads to the street like multiple buildings. It
does.
is a big building.
It is huge.
You have to admit and agree that I said that to you guys
Right at the-
18 months ago.
Yep.
And I said, it looks really huge to me. And you, since then, did a good job of putting it in context.
You broke it up.
Which was my other.
We were
request.
following your suggestion.
Right, and added some landscaping and some streetscaping and made it, and so I guess part of the question is, that building is sketched, but it's not engineered, right?
Well, we have an architectural design that does every floor. Bill Gardner did it.
It's based on specific architectural plans.
Yeah, so is it possible for that building to be built and managed by the code as 2 or 3 or 4 buildings? I don't know the answer to that question.
But probably not.
Not with a reasonable price.
I mean,
We are looking at economizing on the building, but I doubt I'll be able to cut it by a factor of 2.
I mean, we're going to have to give up, is really what I'm saying to you. And you're not going to, maybe you'll be able to fit seniors into your concept, but it's not going to be really a good answer. This is a good answer to what seniors need. They need a centralized building with facilities, services underneath, which we would call the commercial part, but everything's contained within it, so that you have a lifestyle that is protected, an envelope for elderly people to function as human beings in the wintertime. We've all just went through this. And, I said to myself, I'd like to be at Wisdom House today, so I don't have to fall down on my hip, and break something. This building is essentially what we think we need. And I've shown it to the state. Lindsay Curley loves this stuff. And Fowler and, people that we've shown this to in the state are very enthusiastic about it. And they think this is an example that should be used all over the state for how to solve the senior problem. But you're going to close us out. That's what you're saying to me. Yeah.
Well, I think, the challenge we have is we really appreciate what you guys are trying to do, and we really want to support it. And the question is, if we allow buildings of that size so that you can do yours, what would it be like if there were 3 or 4 buildings of that size that weren't as nicely done as yours is done?
I don't think that should be my problem.
No, but it is ours.
That's our.
I do understand that, sure.
And it's we love what you're trying to do, and I mean really, but that's where we are at this moment, trying to figure out how to do this, how to work with you so you can do that, because we want to support it, but at the same time respect the sort of scale that is Jericho, that is Riverside. And I'm all in favor of bigger scale buildings in Riverside. Really, I think.
Could I do 2 I'm past my 3 minutes, I know this. Could I do 2 of those buildings and put an air bridge between them?
Yeah,
Sort of like at the airport.
Yes, because that fundamentally changes that would work, I think.
Right.
So that's I just to be candid with you about what we're trying to, how we're trying to.
I'm about to give up, guys.
Well, we don't want
We
you to
don't
give
want
up.
you to give up, we really don't.
Can you hang in there for 1 second? Because I have some feedback that will affect this. One, I strongly suggest that you get.
Well, wait a second, are you okay to give him time to
Jim's
talk,
kind
or-
of creative, he's a creative guy, he might come up, we have to come up with a solution for how to help. People want to stay in town. You know, we can fill this building 3 times.
Right.
With the need here. And
If that building were 2 or 3 buildings that had connections, I mean, he mentioned it, there's definitions of connector buildings, outbuildings that potentially provide that environment that might not be significantly different than what you have.
so I could have a bridge between 2 buildings or 3 buildings. I've seen these all over the place, they do it, you know. People can walk
We
underneath it.
can't say yes or no theoretically, like we could do this or we could do that. I think the question that you're asking is, does the regulation enable multiple buildings that are connected? And in general, I think the answer to that is yes.
But we also have underground parking for the entirety of this building, which.
Yeah,
The code says elevation, and elevation is not below ground.
Yeah, I don't know that would
Yeah, I don't
matters.
think that would necessarily matter.
So we could do it, we could just make everything underground.
I mean, we can't say yes, you can,
No,
or no,
yes.
you can't, but
I think this is a really crucial discussion that we're having now. And so I'd like to,
Well,
Okay.
I'll leave it.
Okay, so Jim, can you come forward?
yeah, I'll go really fast. Number one, I've been doing this for 50 years, and practically speaking, I think all the work you're doing is great. But you need to deal with the Agency of Natural Resources, impervious surfaces, stormwater, and with septic. In order for any of this to be real, you need to have an infrastructure plan to go in effect, prior to the development, underneath everything. And one of the things I'll say to you about senior housing is think geothermal and think enclosed environment. As you age, you've got to get away from slip and fall risks. And if you want to have the socialization, you're going to need that canopy that they have over to create the big building. And you start doing airwalks, and now I've got a handicap problem, and I've got to create a conveyor belt and all this other stuff. I'm suggesting that you seriously consider creating, as you're working on this, a special integrated senior mixed housing area, a carve out. Think of it as something that is unique within your PUD or a PUD inside of the PUD, and send them off to do their work and bring it back to you in a suitable fashion. You got Tetro, you got a single owner, you've got a user, you've got a group of people, and you trying to figure out how to put that into all the stuff that you're doing, I think it's herding cats and polishing pebbles. Let them bring to you a finished product that meets the needs of the senior housing, that's energy efficient, that's affordable, because it'll probably have to be a geothermal building, and it's going to require infrastructure, and that's what Tetro does. So he's probably got people on his staff, and they can come back to you and say, this is going to be the only one like it in this project, and we want you to write this in as a PUD inside of the PUD, and here's all of the codes that we'll comply with. Because trying to comply with labor and industry, fire safety, handicapped accessibility, parking, access, egress, stormwater, sewer, electrical power, all of this stuff is really, really complicated. I'm just doing it on a duplex, and it's a nightmare. I would separate those buildings into separate structures in a heartbeat and save a fortune, because I don't have to deal with labor and industry. I don't have to deal with all those issues. When you're talking about 40 units in one building, it's a really big deal. So my suggestion is that you should have a corollary spinoff to all the work that you're doing, so that Tyler Billingsley brings you something that says you can actually do what you're talking about doing on this site and not have a nightmare with pushing and icing snow. Where are you going to put the snow?
We understand that.
And so do the stormwater. Get the you want to have all these nice buildings with all this cool stuff. You've got to get your water away from those buildings. So that means underground infrastructure that's pre-designed, and you need to have a district that's going to deal with your sewer, your access and egress, and your stormwater. And it needs to go onto the school property so that you can get the density and the affordability and stuff here. And if you don't move fairly quickly on that concept, which is separate from what you're working on, the money is going to be gone. There's still some COVID money. There's still some grant money. As soon as, what's his name, the Donald, wakes up, he's going to put a cancel on money flowing to the state. So I'm going to keep going, Susan. You have a perfect case study on how people react to this. The select board meeting on the Locomotion Raceway, that's part of this neighborhood. Those people were all over negatively pedestrian, multimodal connections, and this is what I heard. Make this a 25-mile-an-hour zone now. No Jake breaks. Establish carpooling so that you don't have to have a car if you live there. Put that in as part of your plan now. The store already has a car parking problem, and because it was an existing building. So you've also got 3 existing buildings. You need to plan as to how you're going to fit all this stuff in there. And the stuff that I gave Chris, these are prototype buildings that are pre-approved. It's all planned out. You want to get this stuff moving, let's agree on what meets these criteria, because most people are not as sensitive to the subjects that you're talking about. Just tell me what I can build and let me run with it. And I'm not sure, Susan, your point, I'm not sure you should have lots. This is all BS for tax assessors and stuff. Most of Hawaii is not owned lots. It's owned by large landowners, and that's how they kept their estate intact. And a major portion of Manhattan is owned by the Catholic Church, so you get a land lease. The town should not be regulating the ownership of land. The ownership of land should be the people who are using it and who own it. And it may be that a retirement plan is very happy to loan all the money to them as long as they own the dirt. And they'll take a 6% or 7% return on that because it's super secure. And then you borrow all the money and you do land leases. So I don't think you should be defining lots necessarily as to get to where you want to be, because I think there'll be a great opportunity here if you have created on your legal, on your infrastructure, and on your financing, and think geothermal, because most of what you're talking about will not work during the winter in Vermont. Okay. There's no place to put this now.
Thank you.
I guess we're leaving. I don't see how it's gonna work. I mean, maybe I'll sleep on it, but.
Well, we're not done, Bill.
They're not done.
We're not
Right,
done.
we're not done.
We're not done.
They heard you. They heard you. They're gonna work on it.
We want to make your building work.
They do.
Can you understand what I'm like?
You're
Yes.
welcome in
Yes.
Jericho. You're welcome.
I'm just so frustrated, and I explained the other day that people that were gonna do this with us are dying. I mean, it's taking so long, and now we are looking at 10% lumber. I mean, everything's going against what we are trying to do, but please come up with something. I mean, the town is asking you, not just Michael and I and Jim,
So the current code, if you put in an application today, the Riverside Code, the way it is currently written, not our changes, doesn't allow you to do that.
No.
Because of the width of the lots.
Yep, okay. But I agree with Chris, yep. It's a scale issue, and it's,
I see Sarah Jane shaking her head, and I feel like I'm screwed. If I don't have you with me.
I'm not shaking my head at you saying that you should throw in the towel. I'm shaking my head at you saying, yes, what you're saying, what your understanding is correct, is that what we just talked about your building doesn't work.
I would
And so
love,
I'm confirming your fear, but I'm not telling you to throw in the towel. We're all sitting here and we've all been well, I shouldn't say champions. We've all been excited about and invested in Wisdom House. And I think that, you know, Chris articulated it all better than I can. So understanding what our role here is in terms of these changes and what we're trying to balance and what we're trying to achieve. But my shaking my head at you is, yeah, you're absolutely right. The building that you've got right there isn't one of the types that was listed up here as the criteria are currently. And I've got it flagged and we're all aware of it and we're talking about it.
I would love to work with you guys, and I'll offer to work in any circumstances, you know, any kind of thing. I have had some experience in doing this, and I would be more than glad to work with you.
You got a real talent here.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to close this public comment, and then Chris, if you just want to remind us what our next steps are.
Oh, sure, you can go to the next slide because I
agenda.
need to be reminded. Great, okay, so Chris Brown and I are gonna, and Susan are gonna reconvene tomorrow, so we'll continue to work on this a little more. Chris Flynn is currently reviewing the draft of all of section 13 that I've not sent to everyone yet. I wanted to have him take a look at it first. And then additional outreach. Susan and I have been talking about, we want to, I'll probably hold like office hours or something during the day once the red line's released so we can have some public input and answer some questions. Maybe do some outreach to property owners in Riverside and just make sure they know what's going on and make sure they're all comfortable with what we've got. So that's the additional outreach part.
And the timeline for that is, we're thinking April 11 or 15 for red line. That we
Yes, around
see.
that time, yeah.
And then.
That's going to be contingent on me working with David.
And then, I'm just thinking about the outreach point. So
Sort of before the public hearing.
before the public hearing, we've had a chance to see it, and then it will be available for folks to review and come and talk with you. I think office hours is a great idea.
It's easily done.
Okay.
And Wisdom House was one of the stakeholders on that list that we talked about, yeah.
Thank you. All right, so just quick updates. Leahy Institute, we have 2 really great interns that I've let know we're going to be extending an offer to. Just it's been delayed on just some other reasons, so that should be going out this week. You should have next Tuesday on your calendar for the Select Board Planning Commission joint meeting, so that's on the calendar, 5:30 here. Future land use update, so I've not heard much from the CCRPC in terms of when it's going to be released. I mean, they've given a couple dates to when the future land use map for the region is going to be released. That keeps moving back, as well as their date for releasing housing targets.
It's not just us. Everybody's moving their.
Right, it's not just us. And then residential density public hearing select board this Thursday, 6 p.m. You won't want to miss it, so that'll be good. I will be there. You don't need to be there. Actually, you can miss it. I will be there to handle that.
That's also when they're talking about the wastewater committee or.
I will talk to you about that after.
Okay.
A?
That doesn't sound good. Okay.
All right, does anybody else have other updates? Were you done?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
That's it, yep.
The bike ped committee, we could share that update. Do you want to do that, Sabrina, or you want me to?
Go ahead.
So the bike ped committee is working on a potential project to install a small demonstration experiment this summer they would apply for a grant. They're partnered with Local Motion. They are holding a community meeting at the library on March 22nd. If people from the Planning Commission want to attend, actually I would encourage that, would be a good thing. And as Jim said, there's definitely some resistance, but there's also some support for the project of the residents, and I think a lot of people don't really completely understand the context and how this project came to be an idea, and it's definitely temporary, and it's definitely to collect data and to see what the reactions are. So if you're around, I think it's in the morning.
At 1 p.m.
Oh, 1 p.m. at the Deborah Rawson Library on March 22nd.
Which is this Saturday.
Yep. And that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything else?
I was at the Energy Task Force meeting last night, and they have someone working on what was supposed to be like a climate action plan for Jericho, but they're sort of shifting gears a little and not necessarily creating a plan per se. They were sort of steered in the direction of maybe more just doing the action steps without going through the labor of the plan. So they may be reaching out to Chris.
I'm meeting with someone Thursday.
Okay, so and the other thing that they were just talking about as part of that discussion was making sure that, or encouraging new builds to have north-south facing buildings so that people could use solar. And so I don't know how that fits into our Riverside discussion, if at all, but that was something that they brought up as a valuable thing for the town to consider. So those were the highlights of the meeting.
Okay. Any other business? No. Okay. Planning for April 1st. Our agenda for April 1st is pretty much already set.
Yes.
We're doing review procedures, and we're going to look at the draft of Chapter 13.
Definitely Chapter 13, definitely looking at public space.
Oh, right.
I don't know about the review procedures yet. I need to coordinate with David.
Okay, so maybe. Does anybody else have anything that we would need to discuss on the April 1st? Okay, motion to adjourn. I'll make the motion to adjourn. I'm allowed to do that. Second?
I'll second.
SJ, thank you. All those in favor of adjourn say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.